Hi, I'm George the Antique Nomad. Come with me as I wander the country in search of valuable vintage, amazing antiques, and cool collectibles. We'll buy, sell, and trade at antique malls, shops, and shows, estate sales, flea markets, thrift stores, anywhere people go to find really interesting things that just aren't made anymore. So come on, let's go! Hello everyone, welcome to this month's edition of the Level 2 bonus video. I'm so happy to bring this to you again. I have put away 20 items over the last month and some really neat stuff this time. I'm very excited to show you because I think that we've got some things that are unusual and interesting and that you'll have a good time, and I will too. So let's get started with no further ado, other than to say thank you to my Level 2 members who do make this bonus content possible. I appreciate your contributions very much, and if you are not a Level 2 member and you'd like to get early access to this, remember that that means that you see it first because these items are going on eBay as this video premieres. So while the video is playing, these items are being listed, and if you're a Level 2 member, you can go straight to eBay. They have a buy it now price as well as an auction starting price, so if you want it, you can get it first thing ahead of everyone else. And if you're seeing this after the fact and you're interested in that, click the join button above or look in the description for the link for memberships. With no further ado, I'm going to get started because there's a lot of cool stuff and I want to spend a little time with you with it. So the first item is an old US Army canteen. Now, if you're old enough to remember when there were a lot of Army surplus stores around, there still are, but there used to be a time when you could get all sorts of crazy old stuff at Army surplus stores because they had things that were back to the Second World War when I was a kid, and even older than that for people at earlier stages with this. And at some point, this was surplus. This is a Spanish-American War canteen. And this one should date to right about 1902, and the reason we can be that precise is because they made a big change around that time. They quit using a leather strap and started using the same straps that they were on some of their packs because it made more sense to use canvas and because they could have the same strap do multiple purposes. And the strap actually has a name, I believe a maker name, A.B. Radway, on it. You'll also notice that it's concave on one side. This was so that it would press flatter up against the person carrying it, because before these things were kind of bulbous and round, and they would sort of knock around a lot and slosh around, and it meant that people could hear you coming, which was not a good thing if you were trying to sneak through the woods, for example. So this was a big improvement, and you would just go like so. It has its original cork stopper. These are often missing on these. And that's why this one, because it's pretty complete, it's not missing anything, nothing is damaged or lost. It's got some normal wear for being its age and having been used, but it's a neat piece. These sell for $100 or more potentially, so we will see what happens with this one. It's going on eBay right now, and we will be able to follow along. Part of the reason I do these videos this way is so that you can watch along and see how things do. If you're a reseller, it's a good way to get some market education. And we also spend a little extra time doing a little more discussion of what these things are and why they're interesting. Now we're going to go the opposite direction from military to cute. And boy, is this cute. This is a cloche, that means bell in French, and this is a very sweet little embroidered cap, and I'm going to bring it up a little bit closer for you so that you can see the color and the detail. It is the type of thing that the flappers wore. This one is referred to, it's got a great label inside, as, I'm going to turn it inside out so you can see it. It is a California Evergreen Sport Hat. And it's got such a neat label there. The inside shell is all in very good condition. The outside is in mostly good condition. It was worn and used in its time. It does have a few little issues that I will show. It's got a lot of stitching in it, and there's just a little bit of separation that you can see in a few places and a few very small pinholes where something at some point in its life before it was stored in a cedar chest thought it was delicious. So I do want to do that for full disclosure. But of course, it wouldn't be a hat if I didn't try it on, because that's just something that I like to do. This one's a little bit short, a little bit small for my 7 1/4 head. It's probably about a 6 1/2, so a nice size that will fit a lot of women, or more likely will fit a bust in a vanity display. The flappers love this sort of thing. They got the bobs and the short hairstyles, and then this was something that covered it up so that you really just saw little wisps of hair come out from underneath. A very cute style. It was made possible by the short styles of the 1920s to wear these sorts of things, and these can be rather valuable. Now this particular one, because it's not perfect, I suspect will sell in about a $30 to $35 range, but these can sell for $100 or more, and when you get into some of the fancier materials, they can go for $200 and $300, especially if you have something by an early designer. So this is a cute thing, and it would look great in someone's boudoir collection. I'm excited to see who ends up with this. Now, I'm not doing a ton of pottery and china in this episode because we're in the time of year where people are outdoors a lot, but I wanted to share this with you. This actually came to me from a viewer. It was such a nice thing of her to do. I did something for her and she decided to send me this as a thank you. And it's very kind of her. I really do love the piece. I don't collect deco anymore for myself like I used to, and so that's the reason I think we'll share it with someone else. But this is Hall's china, and it's Hall china, but you will see on the bottom of it that this one has the round Hall mark that was used up until about 1969, but these pieces were all made in the late 30s. And sometimes they say Hall's quality china on them as well. It is a beautiful color. This is called Chinese red. When I first got in the antique business, I'd been a tow truck dispatcher right after college because there were no jobs, the economy was rough. And then I ended up in the antique business, and someone who had worked with me in the tow truck office decided to come pay me a visit at the antique mall I was at in Snohomish, Washington, and she came in and said, "Oh, I just love the Hall Chinese red. Do you have any?" And that's how I was introduced to this, is that we went around the mall and found her a few pieces. It's such a hot color. They made it on a lot of their Art Deco lines. It is difficult to do red glazes. That's why you see them usually by themselves without any other colors, because they burn off really easily in the kiln, so it has to be fired at a fairly low temperature for it to work. And the condition on this is really clean. I will point out one little thing, because I am a real stickler for honest representation. There is one tiny, tiny little, I guess it's a chiplet. It's not on the lid. I'm not really sure how that happened. I don't know if it could have even been done at the factory, perhaps. I'm just not sure, but it is in immaculate shape otherwise. And the most important part is that the color is in really good shape, because with the Chinese red, again, they were fired at a lower temperature, so they were prone to scratching if you weren't careful, or if you used something really abrasive or like a Brillo pad on it. You could definitely take this color off if you scrub too hard. So it's really good to see one in such nice condition, and I expect that this will sell with the little ding probably in a $35 to $50 range somewhere. A perfect one recently sold for $75 plus shipping. The sundial is such a great design. Sundials, of course, go way, 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 way back in human history, but they were a perfect Art Deco design. And a lot of other companies saw what Hall did and then came up with other things that had a sundial look. I just happen to have one right here that I'm getting ready to ship to a customer. This is Glass Bake, and this is their version of sundial. Shawnee did a sundial piece in the 1950s under the Kenwood line. So you will see sundials in kitchenware in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, but that Hall piece is a really special one. And it was called Chinese red because there was a lot of interest in China at the time, and because it was that bright, fiery red. Well, speaking of things that happened in the 1930s and 40s, One thing that happened was a very influential book was written, and it was written by a fellow named George Orwell. We, of course, know him also for the book 1984, where people talk in doublespeak and things that are bad are portrayed as being good, and everything is topsy-turvy and upside down. But he also wrote the book Animal Farm. He was an English social critic, and he was somebody who had been born in an Anglo-Indian family in Bengal. And because of that, he had a little different take because he saw both sides of the society and the culture and the way things were, and he wanted to illustrate, in this case, what happens when people march towards totalitarianism and give up their rights. And so this was a very influential book, and this is, with the dust jacket, the first edition in America done by Harcourt Brace in 1946. So you've got the presentation page here, and then the important part is you see copyright 1946. It doesn't even say first edition because it was the first one. And that is why this particular issue, which I had the very good fortune of finding in a museum thrift store. The museum has a little thrift store in this one county as a way to support their stuff. Someone had donated this to them, and they had it for sale for $3. I actually donated a little bit more to the cause because I knew that this book could easily run potentially over $100 for the first edition with the dust jacket. It's a good read. It's an important book. A lot of us, I didn't take a lot of literature in school, but we all had to read this in 8th grade, where I went to school, and a lot of people I know read it in junior high school. So if it's time for you to read it again, here's a nice original piece that should retain some pretty good value over the years. And I personally like old books, and I love finding first editions, so this was exciting. And while we're on the subject of books, I have a couple of other books that are exciting for a different reason. These may not look like much. They look like old recipe books shoved full of old yellowed papers and that sort of thing. Always look at things that look like old recipe books shoved full of yellow papers and things if you're out there thrifting or hitting an estate sale or a yard sale, which is where these came from, because sometimes you find somebody's very interesting travelogues, and that's what this is. This person is a woman who traveled largely by herself through Africa and the Middle East in the 1950s. She'd been a missionary. There were other books in this collection as well, which I'm sure I'll bring you in the future. But I wanted to start with these because these illustrate her trip through Africa and through the Middle East. And they talk about the things people talk about. If you look here, this one says it's an air travel book. Unfortunately, the folks at the yard sale put the price tag right on the front with tape and then ripped it off and damaged the book. But that was not really where the value of these was, so I didn't fuss about it too much. Although I did say, please let me do the other one. What's interesting about this is she had been a missionary, and so she had a certain take on the things that she saw happening in the culture, and these happened to take place right near the end of colonialization. So right when the English and the French are starting to leave the Middle East and Africa, that's when these diaries were done. And so there's some really interesting stuff in here. I'm going to just open to, let's see here. Okay, so we are in Benin, a famous old city in the western region. I did not see from there, but it's famous for brass, bronze masks, and they still worship orishas, which are demigods, and fetishes, family sacrifices. So she talks a lot about the types of things she's seeing from the standpoint of what's different in the culture. And some of these things don't really exist in those cultures as much anymore, so it's interesting to see how things were there. I'm a bit lonely. I went shopping with the mobs on Monday on the 24th, and I have my own little tree in the room for today is Christmas, and I am by myself. And I thought that was kind of sweet. Then she goes on, she kept lots of clippings, she kept things that were related to stuff she did, like the Springbok tours. There's a little map showing part of her journey. And what's so fun about this, and I thought really interesting right now, is a lot of this is talking about places in the Middle East that really are not open to travel right now. So this is a way for you to experience through someone else's eyes what it was like to travel through those areas when they were very different from the way they are now. And it's a chance to take a trip from your armchair without actually having to go someplace that right now might be a little dangerous to go. She's got some nice pieces that she clipped into the middle. I'm going to open one page of the other one that I thought was interesting too. The city has been rebuilt in the last 50 years because it was destroyed during the Boer Wars. This is Khartoum she's speaking of. She also talks about in South Africa, the Union of South Africa. It is amazing how the servant class makes life so much easier for those of us who are tourists here and how underappreciated they are. I thought that was a very interesting thing. It's a very interesting read. There's 2 of them. I'm starting them at $19.99, so it's a very inexpensive way for somebody to take a trip. And I think it will be really fun for somebody to read. The next thing that I wanted to show, these little oyster-shaped plates I thought were very pretty. And they have a good story because they are Bing& Grøndahl. And when Bing & Grøndahl was producing in Denmark, this was the seagull pattern. You can see the mark on the back there. And then here's the seagull on the front. These are oyster-shaped because these were little things for either oyster shooters or melted butter or salt. They're really salt dips, I believe is how they're described in the catalog. I have a set of 6 here. If I'm careful, I will still have a set of 6 here. And they have nice gilding on the edges. I think it's a very pretty pattern. At one time, it was so popular in Denmark that 1 out of 10 homes had seagull as their primary china pattern that they used every day. And that was fairly remarkable because this was expensive when it was new. I'm showing you these little oyster butter pats or salt dips because I think that they're an interesting shape. But I actually have an entire set of this. I think I have a service for 8. So if you like this pattern and you're interested in other pieces, I do have a lot of other pieces available as well. I just thought that these were fun, and these were something that someone who maybe doesn't collect this pattern could still use in some other manner, as pin dishes, as little things around the house to use for putting your rings when you're washing your dishes, or putting your gum when you're at the table, or things like that, like we were made to do as children. Actually, we were made to throw ours out, but that's another story. But the seagull pattern, extremely popular, and it was extremely costly when it was new. This was not cheap stuff. Back in the 1970s, when they bought this piece, they were paying as much as $300 and $400 for a coffee pot. Those sell for about half of that now, so it's a wonderful time to be collecting this. But there's a lot of it in the United States. It's always been very popular around seacoast areas. I also see it in the Salt Lake City area because the Mormons have the connection with the seagulls because the seagulls ate the locusts and managed to help their crops survive the first year so that they didn't starve to death out in the desert. So there's a lot of places that have affinity for seagulls. I see seagulls way up in the interior. I was just at Kentucky Dam, and there were seagulls flying around there. So they get around. And so it's a motif that goes a lot of places. And I think someone will really enjoy these. I believe I started this off, I want to say at $39. I don't have notes in front of me, so you'll have to take a look at the eBay listing. But I expect that this set, these usually sell for about $12 to $15 each, so I'm imagining that somewhere in the $60 to $70 range will be the final price on these. Well, from elegant dinnerware, we're going on a completely different tack now. Some people thought this was a joke when they heard it talked of, but this is a real thing. It's Superman versus Muhammad Ali. They have a very convoluted way that Superman and Muhammad Ali come together in order to fight crime, but then somehow they are set up in a boxing match against each other. It's a very silly premise, but it was a very popular comic when it came out. It came out in 1978 in this jumbo size by DC Comics. And this one is in pretty great condition. And here's part of why it's so popular. That little strip at the bottom says, "Can you see the celebrities in the audience?" And then when you open the front page, it actually tells you who's sitting here. Here we have Jimmy and Rosalind Carter in the corner. We have Batman. We have the back of, I think that's Telly Savalas's head. There are all sorts of famous dignitaries, celebrities, and other people here and on the back cover watching this boxing match. And on the inside cover, they have a list of all 172 dignitaries and celebrities who were pictured in this. So if you weren't sure who you were looking at, you could tell. And they've got everybody from Cher, Donnie and Marie, Tony Orlando, Kurt Vonnegut Jr. is in there. They've got the Jacksons. Sergio Aragones, the Mad Magazine artist, who I suspect had a lot to do with illustrating this. They've got, who else is famous now that people would recognize? Well, Plastic Man. Plastic Man is somebody that people know. So it's a pretty interesting magazine. And the good thing is that you can see Superman didn't do too well there. The interesting thing with this is that a kid had this, but they didn't thrash it. It's just slightly bumped at the corners. There's no handwriting. There's no torn or missing pages. And because of that, I was very surprised and pleased to find out that this item, which again came from a yard sale for a few dollars, is worth somewhere potentially in the $100 to $150 range, because these comic characters are just really popular again, and this is the era of kids that are collecting their old childhood nostalgia. So there you go. Interesting piece, and I think it'll be fun to see how it does on eBay. The reason I list on eBay with these things, it's a bit of an experiment. It's partly so that you can see along with me how things go and what the current market for things is. It's also because it's an easy place that we all have access to use. I know Etsy might be better for certain things, like the cap that I showed might do better on Etsy, but I want to put these things where they're the most accessible to the most people, because that helps with resellers or people who have collections they're trying to sell, to see what the market that they have the easiest access to is paying for the type of items that we are selling here. I think we'll stick on this childhood theme for one more piece, because this one is another one. This was at a flea market recently. It is in immaculate condition. It's the Boy Scout oath, and there are lots of Boy Scout oaths running around. Lots of people were Boy Scouts. Lots of people knew the Boy Scout oath. This is the original oath. You'll notice it doesn't have all the words that the later oath has. You'll also see on the back up here, it cost 85 cents when it was new. This was not a leathercraft thing that somebody made at Scout Camp. This was actually a professionally done piece. You can tell because it's got screen printing and the way that it's assembled. So you can see the screen paint on there. I like the big knot underneath the Boy Scout logo. And in the bottom here, this burned-in stamp is Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky. So somebody got this there as a souvenir. Perhaps a scout group went there and they ordered these thinking that there would be interest. But whoever got this, they hung it on the wall in a really dust-free place where it didn't get marked and it didn't lose any of its crispness. It's like brand new. I think that's really cool. I have not seen one of these sell online for quite a while. There was nothing like this currently when I went to look at listings. I did see other mottos of a more typical, like the Buzza mottos, the printed ones that we see from the 1920s, and they were selling the Boy Scout mottos made by them for around $45. I suspect this might go for as high as that. We shall see. It's going to be from right about 1940. Well, I have a couple of ICUs, and here's one of them. Ooh, I really don't see you, though. There we go. One big eye, one little eye. This, I think, is really beautiful. I look for these. I don't find them often. People don't part with these very often. These are an early version of repurposing in antiques and vintage, and that's part of the reason I wanted to have this in this particular grouping to show you, because you will see these out here, and also because it's interesting to know, with so many people doing repurposing now, what will happen to the things that we repurpose in the future? Will people value them, or will they say, oh, they were ruined and they should have left it alone? Well, in this case, people value them, and I'll show you why. The bottom part of this is a gold-filled mother of pearl, very ornate encrusted Victorian parasol handle. So this originally held an umbrella above your head rather than a magnifying glass. Now what happened is that a lot of times the way these were made in Victorian times, these were really well made in the handle, and then the rest of it was pretty flimsy. It was a stick and some wires and some very thin fabric, and the fabric started to rot out if it was silk based, or it got torn, or they were usually black and black wasn't in style anymore and people just didn't take care of them. Well, about late 60s, early 70s, when the modern era of collecting really got started, people were finding these great parasol handles and they started collecting them, but they weren't really sure what to do with them. And somebody came up with the idea, well, some people turned them into canes and walking sticks, but then somebody came up with the idea of turning them into magnifying glasses. So this end from here on is the repurposing. This was added at some point around 1970. Now, a lot of times these are Japanese, but this particular one says made in USA on it. So they actually used an American lens to repurpose this American parasol handle. So it's all American, which I think is nice. It means it's an earlier repurposing from right about 1970. And I just think it's beautiful. If you look up close, you can see how ornate the designs are. It does have a monogram. Most of these were presentation pieces, so the original person had their initials put on it, or someone did it for them. Then you've got the mother of pearl inlay. These pieces can fall apart if they're not well maintained, so the fact that this is in really good shape matters a lot. And the fact that the optic is good. I mean, you really can see, ooh boy, that's very odd. Very strange to look through while I'm trying to see beyond to the camera, and I do not know where to focus, but this is very fun. It's interesting, it's useful. I mean, I use a magnifying glass practically every single day in this business, and anyone who's a serious collector has a pretty good reason to need one of these, so I think it'll do well. I have seen prices anywhere from $75 to $150 on repurposed parasol handle magnifying glasses. Where this one will fall in that level will be up to the market, and we shall find out very soon because it's going online right now. Well, while we're back in the Victorian era, I just found this. This was given to me by a gal who organizes estate sales for people who are moving into retirement homes. But this actually belongs to her. She is now downsizing herself. And so she decided to let this go from her collection. I think it's a really great piece. I've seen these before. I've never had one before. It's called magicka. And what's fascinating about it, besides look at the great graphic with the wizard and all these symbols, which means that a lot of times these are listed as being occult, but really it's more like the Victorian era's version of Trivial Pursuit, because the way it works, when we open the lid, which is a nice wooden lid that just slides out, I'm going to do it like this so the pieces don't fall out. It consists of this glass face with a hand, the hand of fate. And what you do, much like Trivial Pursuit with the different genuses, you put in the blue disc with the blue surround that has all the answers to all the questions asked on the blue disc. And then if you want to answer the yellow questions, there's a yellow disc. And if you want to answer the third level, let's get this off so you can see. This is the pink level, which of course is seen the least use because it's at the bottom, so these are usually in the best shape, the pink one. The important thing is it's all here. It's got all 3 discs and all 3 inserts. Here are the directions. In asking a question, place the question card so it will fit exactly over this disc, placing the question asked at the top so that the disc on the edge will be directly opposite the disc on the top of this disc, etc., etc., etc. The point is that you put the disc on, and if it was laying flat, this little hand here will go point to the correct answer. And so it's the hand of fate. The reason it does this is that there are magnets in these little discs, and there is a magnet in the bottom of this, and so the magnets work in opposition together to cause the little hand to move around. And I can show you now, because I moved it, now the hand is up at the top. And if you put it in other places, the hand will continue to spin around. Now this is in reasonable played with condition. It's got a little bit of schmutz in there. I am not about to try to take this apart to get that out. I don't know where that came from. So that is going to be part of the purchase. But then you just have these great graphics, and when you look at it, actually I guess they're all the same on the corner, so I'll just leave this here. So you have the skull and all these things that seem to imply sorcery, and again all of this very sort of occult and scary stuff. But in reality, the questions are really quite ordinary, like, what is the capital of Turkey? Or what is an island? Or on the back we have, there's got to be something a little more meaty than that. Oh, this one seems to be all capitals. Let's try, what's the population of the United States? And it's about 100 million, so that's a long time ago. When was gold discovered in California? So the questions are not nearly as spooky looking as the graphics of the game, but it is a fantastic, neat early game. These sell very readily every time they come on the market, and they typically sell for about $100 if they're in complete condition like this. They generally are a little aged and worn looking like this because these were parlor games. People nowadays think of the parlor as a very stiff place that you sat still, and why would you want a parlor? But in the old days, the parlor was the part of the house you kept neat, because everything else, you're living out in the country or even in the city, you've got mud streets, people are tracking stuff in, you've got a big family running around. The parlor was the nice sanctuary where you took your guests and you played games, and it was very genteel and clean and nice, and that was the fun place to be in the house back then. So this is a nice Victorian parlor game, and I can't wait to see where it goes. Well, since I am feeling juvenile today and we saw one game, I'm going to just keep going with juvenile stuff because I think this is great. This is from the 1950s, and Disney collectors, of course, will recognize this. Western collectors will recognize this. This is Zorro, and these are the Jamar stay-in-tray picture puzzles. What's great is that it's got the original box. Usually these are long gone and you just have the puzzles. Now the box has a little bit of wear, certainly commensurate with age, but it doesn't look to me like the puzzles have been played with a whole lot at all. Here's Zorro in a sword fight. Here's Zorro looking very handsome, sitting on top of a horse. And they do have the Walt Disney Productions. You'll see the WDP mark, Walt Disney Productions, spelled out in the upper right corner. He was one of the first Disney TV heroes, and so he was a big deal. It was when everything Western was very popular, and yes, they did deliberately cast somebody very good looking so that since Mom had to sit around and watch the TV with the kids, well, she got a little bit of eye candy out of the deal. So I think these are very cute. They seem to go pretty well. This came from a flea market. I expect that this will be a nice return on my investment because of that. And I expect that these will sell somewhere in the $45 to $60 range for the set, which is really not a whole lot when you consider that there are 4 puzzles in here. So that's really only about $15 a piece. But the fact that it's got the box and the cellophane really makes a difference. And since we're on the I know that somebody out there thought this guy was hot phase of this presentation, I also found another thing at the swap meet, and I know that there are some of my viewers who will remember this guy probably a little more fondly than we might like to admit. So this is Tom Selleck as Magnum PI. These are trading cards from 1982. They originally would have had a cellophane wrapper, so I'm not going to start them at a very high price because they don't have that, but I believe there were 64 in the series. There were 2 different packs you could get. I believe there are 32 of them in this collection. He liked to drive around in Ferraris and strut around the beach and occasionally solve a crime or two in the process. I'm pretty sure there was a plot to this, but I don't think the plot was really the main reason that people were watching this show. So, in any event, it's a big collection, and if you are really devoted and you get them all, then on the back you can put them together and you can make a great big poster of Mr. Selleck. And there he is looking positively copper-toned, like they made him up really heavily, but I think it was just bad camera angle. Anyhow, it might seem like a silly thing, but non-sports playing cards are really hot right now, and that's really the reason I wanted to show you this, is because I wanted you to be aware that if it is a trading card that is not baseball, basketball, football, it still has value. It doesn't just have to be the Beatles. In fact, the Beatles cards have kind of come down in price because there are so many of them that were made. But some of these other celebrities where they made a line for a couple of years, that line of Magnum PI cards came out in 1982, which was, I think the 82 to 83 season was its peak of popularity. So they were on the market for a brief time, and they are collectible now. The old Batman trading cards, anything to do with television celebrities, definitely collectible. The Magnum ones don't go for a ton. I would be surprised if those sold for more than about $20 for the set. But again, I just thought that it was a fun and interesting thing about the market that I could share with you. Now we're going to look at a little different type of beauty with this. I think these are really wonderful. These are Pakesh. These are from Russia. When things started to open up in the era of détente in the 1970s, we started to have more access to these in the West. They've been made for, gosh, over a century that I know of in Russia, and probably a lot longer. But these are lacquer, and these represent various Russian fairy tales. The Firebird is one of my personal favorites just because I think it's such a beautiful motif. The reason I chose to put this one out for sale, I got 4 or 5 in a collection. I'm going to take the others to shows. But I thought this one would be fun for someone because it has 5 different scenes. So you're getting different Russian fairy tales. You have the Voyager. You have the deer. I think one of them is Ivan and the horse. I'm not sure. I don't really know my Russian fairy tales the way I should. But there is a really good book, actually 2 books that were written about this subject that you can find through, is it thriftbooks.com? You can find the old collector's references. That would be a good place to look. They're really well made. Now, a lot of them actually will have the name of the town and an artist's signature in the painting in really, really tiny letters. I did not find that on this particular one, but I like the shape. It's small, but it's square and it's upright, so it actually would be useful for little things like stamps or tea leaves or, you know, a little bit of jewelry, things that you'd like to hide in plain sight, which to me is a great security system. You put the stuff right out where people can see it and they figure, well, it's not hidden, so it's not worth a bunch of money. So I always put my valuables right where everyone can see them. This is just a very pretty piece. I think that one like this, the prices have been going up on these lately. And so I suspect that this could sell for as much as $40 to $50 because the shape is a little bit more unusual and because of the multiple scenes. We will see. And speaking of seeing, there we go. These are Binolux or Binolux, depending how I would say Binolux because binoculars, but they may have had a trade name that was different from that. You know, some of these things have become obscure with time, and you have to find someone who represented them back in the day to tell you how they're really pronounced. But you'll see they are marked. They are field glasses, but they're really very good coated lens binoculars from the 1960s era, made in Japan. This is when Americans start realizing that Japanese technology with lenses is really good because of the camera industry. And so they start wanting things like this too. These are really useful, and I figured that since we still have some nice weather and people are wanting to do more things outside than inside right now, that it might be useful to somebody. It's an 8 by 20, meaning that at 1,000 yards you can see it as if you're 300 feet away. So they're good for sporting events or things where you're in the back row because you wanted to stay away from people or because the tickets were too expensive. And so this can be the thing that makes up for getting the cheap seats. And they work really well. The optics are really good. They do have their original case with the original strap not broken, which is nice. These straps oftentimes are gone. So it's a nice little package. They're Japanese from the 60s. I expect this to sell in a modest range, probably around $30. But binoculars are something worth looking for because, like cameras, they can feature very good lenses, and the value can oftentimes have to do with the lens and who made it more than anything else. I get a lot of questions about Steins. I get questions from men who collect Steins about Steins, and I get questions from women who either collect or have a man in the family who collects or collected Steins. How do I tell if I have a good one or not? And these in particular are difficult to tell. I know there's another YouTuber, she loves to collect them, and she especially looks for the ones with lithophane. Lithophane is where the bottom has a seam in it. I don't know whether you'll be able to see the seam in there or not. But there is a soldier, yeah, I think you can get at least a little of it. There is a soldier saying goodbye to his woman. I think you can see it at least in the shadows there. Now, it says right on it that this is from 1907 to 1909, when this fellow, Gefrichter Schmidt, would have been in his regiment. And it is an artillery shell. So if you unscrew the cap, there's a couple of different levels. They have little marks on them. It's supposed to symbolize the artillery. Now, when you take this off, there's not really anything under it, so I'll just leave it be. But the important thing is this real? Because there are a ton of fakes of these. Tons and tons of these were made in the 60s and 70s because people got interested in militaria, and so they just started reproducing them like crazy. But they made a lot of mistakes with the reproductions, or at least things that you might be able to use to tell the difference. For example, look how shiny bright the inside is and how dark the outside is. That is a good indicator. That is one way that you can tell an older piece because the interior has been shut off from air. The exterior has had 100+ years to oxidize, so it should be significantly darker than the inside. Another thing to look for is the theme. This is the artillery. This is an artillery shell. Is the theme of the stuff on the Stein correct? I saw one of these that had the Graf Zeppelin on it. The Graf Zeppelin didn't come out until 1928. What is it doing on a 1909 Stein? It's not a 1909 Stein if that's the case. This one has artillery on the artillery. Notice how it's worn in the back. It's worn as if somebody actually handled it. It originally had this luster paint all around. Now it's missing here. Why? Because you hold it like this and you take a drink. And that is the reason that you should see normal wear from where it was held. This has normal wear. Also, the gold with the people, what they would do is a bunch of guys from a regiment would go in. They'd have a stock transfer and then they would embellish with the regiment and the names of the guys in the regiment. They almost never used anyone's first name. Lots of the reproduction ones have the first and last name on it. That's a good clue. These are very faint because they've worn with time, because this has been handled, so they've worn off. That's a good clue that it's an older one. Newer ones typically have a bump in the handle right here because it looks fancier. And we want everything to be fancy because in the old days we're all about fancy. Well, not true. Not necessarily true. So a bump in the handle is a good indication that it is a reproduction. This one does not have a bump in the handle. Also, and this may be hard to tell because they're very small, the buttons are hand painted. They are not transferware. So someone went in and dotted all of these buttons with paint. That is a hallmark of an original. So this one has all of the correct hallmarks of an original. It also came from an antique dealer's estate who seemed to be very knowledgeable based on the other things they had. There were not fakes and forgeries in the house at all. And so that makes me feel very confident in selling this one as an original. Why does that make a difference? Well, a copy could go for $50, $75, maybe $100. This one being original, if the right people see it and have interest, could go for as much as $250 to $400 because it's an original and it's a lot harder to find the originals than the fakes. So I'm excited to see how this does. It's a good piece and it was fun to bring to you to show you those things because you are going to encounter these in the wild, and 9 out of 10 at least that you encounter are going to have been made in 1970 rather than 1907. And speaking of things that soldiers drank booze out of, here's another one. They were not strictly used for that, but this is a 1.5 gill. If you notice the embossing right here, this is English. These were largely distributed, and it's got a stock number embossed on the bottom. These were largely distributed because this would have been the ration of rum that a sailor might have been allowed in a single day, which is plenty. And so an English sailor likely owned this piece. You'll see some that have anchors on it, then you know for sure. But there were lots that were done just with the measurement on it. And you think, well, that's cute. It's kind of a plain thing. They must have made a lot of these, and they sure did, because the Royal Navy was giant and lots of people were running around using these at one time. But then war came and depression came, and people sold things like this for... They scrapped it for war material. They sold it because they needed the money. And so these copper pieces like this are not actually in the kind of supply that they used to be. And that's why this should sell for somewhere between $45 and $75 depending on the day and depending who sees it. Now we're in August. August is not necessarily prime time online. So it'll be interesting to see how these things do. Is it the right season to be selling this way? Well, that's part of the experiment. And the truth is that so far I've had very good luck because I'm trying to make sure I put interesting things out there that people really will like. And so I have optimism that this will do well. The next piece I have to show is really pretty, and it's going to be a little cumbersome to show you. This just came out of a cedar chest for the first time in decades. It is a wonderful quilt, and let's see if I can do this so that you can see the patterns upright. From a distance it looks like applique, but when you get closer you realize that it actually is fully quilted by hand everywhere. You can tell by hand because the rows of stitching are not uniform. You can tell that it's quilted because the sewing of the quilting goes over the birds and the fountain or the planter rather than just stopping and, oh, we just sewed on a big piece of fabric. And so that's why this is a rather special pattern. It's on the thin side and the border is thin. That is typical of quilts from the 1930s and 40s. That is what I expect the date of this is, looking at the colors and the style. And the panels have some variation in them that I think is rather interesting. You have bluebirds and a pink flower. You have birds with a blue flower. This one has tulips. I will have a good picture online so that you can see what it looks like when it's all opened up, because this is a really pretty piece and it sort of doesn't do it justice just showing a little at a time, but it's the best I can do. This is it looks like a narcissus or a daffodil. This one, I think they just had an extra piece of fabric. I've never seen a flower like that in nature. I've noticed very few stains. There's a little bit of a blue mark here, which almost looks like an ink or a bluing stain. I have not washed this. I know that there are very safe ways to wash old quilts that will make them white and bright and very nice to use again. I do not feel comfortable doing it myself. I have had bad experiences because I'm really... Linens are something I really like and are challenging to me. I'm not good at ironing. I've had trouble with washing, so I tend to just leave things as they are and sell them as they are. But I think this one's just a beauty because it's more unusual. You know, a typical quilt nowadays, sort of your average pattern from this era in decent shape with no holes, might be $75. This one I think could be double that because of the colors and the style. So I am excited to put that out. The nice thing is that even though it's heavy, it fits in a rather small box. This is a full size, I believe. I've got the measurements in the listing, and this is going to go up for sale right now. The next piece I wanted to show, because I got it during the Olympics, but not in time to put it online, but I still think it's very interesting, and since the Olympics just ended, I thought it's still in people's minds and I'm going to put it out there. This is a new old stock hat badge, and you can tell hat badge because it's got a big long post on here covered by a rubber tube that is actually just something they use for shipping. This comes off and then they would pin it on the back here. And this is from the 1996 Atlanta Olympics, which of course was the centennial of the Olympics. It was not used. You can see that the monogram space down here is blank. So this is new old stock, and that's why I thought this would be interesting to someone. There are a lot of badge collectors. People are interested in police badges, firemen's badges, any sorts of things, even occupational pins from places people worked. And this is definitely something that I think is kind of different because it has to do with the Olympics. It was the centennial of the modern Olympic Games, so the Atlanta Games are considered a little more special. A lot of American collectors prefer to collect the American Games, and this is just something different. So I am thinking that this will sell for somewhere probably in the $30 to $35 range, and we'll just see where it goes. So we're up to our penultimate piece already, which always surprises me, but this is a Kaleem, and it is a saddle bag. It's a saddle bag or a bicycle bag. You've got one side that's stuffed and padded for sitting, and you have one side that is open for storing whatever you need to store. If you're on a long journey on a camel or a bicycle or anywhere. More likely though, it will probably be hung on a wall as wall decoration. There are various Kaleems that are done in Persia, in Turkey, in Afghanistan. All of these were very popular to bring back from trips abroad in the 1950s and 60s. That's when this one dates. You can see on the backing, it's all wool, and it's a mistake to think that they're just rugs that are turned into bags, because rugs have a warp and a weft, whereas these are just woven together. They don't have both things going on. And so because of that, they are in fact a little different than the rugs. They're nice and heavy, they're substantial. The woman who had this one had it in a nice dark place and had very carefully hung it so it didn't damage it or the tassels, so there's no holes or anything missing. And she was using it actually as a place to put magazines. So that's how she used this bottom piece. And you could always attach something to keep this shut if you're hanging it that way and letting it open up. I just think they're really beautiful. They're hand done. It's very unfortunate what's happened in that part of the world, but it means that these in the long run I think will have really good value, and I'll tell you why. A lot of the weavers of these, particularly in Afghanistan and in Iraq and other places that have been war-torn for the last 20 years, those weavers were forced into refugee camps. A lot of the fighting happened where they lived, and so they had to leave. A lot of those people were in small tribes where they knew their own patterns. They did what had always been done for centuries. Now all of a sudden they're meeting all these other weavers with other traditions from other tribes. They're sharing ideas. This is how innovation spreads, but it's also how you lose the purity of the original tribal work. And because of that, with rugs, with these, right now, the market is pretty accessible for a lot of people. They're not terribly expensive. This will probably sell in the $100 to $150 range. If you can project into the future, if you're young enough to hold on to this, there will be a time when it is realized that the tribal purity is gone. You can't look at this pattern and attribute it to a certain place, and that all of the stuff made before then was the period stuff, the original, the stuff that the new stuff is based on. And when that happens, I expect the value of these and rugs to really go up if they were done by a tribal maker, because you're just not going to have that tribal purity anymore. So I think this is an up-and-coming future collectible. Well, for the last item that I want to show you, it's a big set of sterling flatware, and so I decided it was easier to take the camera off the stand and show you this way because there's just too many pieces. But this is by a very famous American company called Reed & Barton. And Reed & Barton was based in Taunton, Massachusetts from 1824 until 6 years ago. They were purchased by Lenox. The market has changed drastically over the years. Their old factory just could not keep up with it anymore, and so they had to give up their independence and merge with Lenox, but they are still making Reed & Barton. However, they're not still making this pattern, and look how pretty all the detail is on this. This is sterling. It's a pattern called Vienna. Now, it looks very formal and traditional, but it actually came out in 1970, right at the peak of modernism, and even as they were making modern designs, they realized that there was still interest in these very beautiful traditional designs, and they realized that it was also a more informal era. So look at the flowers. They're more like wildflowers. Vienna is the pattern name. They are not fussy roses or really formal flowers, even though the overall presentation may be, because again, 1970 is also the hippie era, and so there's a certain flower power aspect to things. And so a young woman getting married in 1970 who wanted something for the hope chest might like something that has the traditional grace and formality and design, and yet also has a little bit of fun and frolic to it. It's a nice service for 12. It's got lots of nice serving pieces. It has been used. I have not polished. I don't generally polish. I will leave that to the person who ends up with this. But this is 64 ounces of sterling silver, and so the value just based on silver should be somewhere in the $1,000 to $1,250 range, depending on the price of silver at the time. And I am finding a lot of people are buying silver as an investment these days. The nice thing is you can eat off of this. You can use it every day, especially because this set was used. You're not going to feel like you're using something precious that's never seen human hands touch before. If you use the liquid soap in the dishwasher, you can wash it in the dishwasher. So it's really not fussy and hard to take care of, which is great. And that's the reason I use sterling silver every day. Well, as always, it's been really great bringing you 20 different things that I thought were interesting, novel, unusual, things that I don't see all the time that I thought would be educational and fun and maybe fit in your home. So if you think these things are interesting, you can go to the Antique Nomad on eBay and you can submit a bid unless someone took it buy it now. I appreciate very much my level 2 members who get the early access to this video and the first dibs for making it possible to do this video every month. And I really appreciate all of you for watching and subscribing and liking and telling your friends. It's great to see your comments. Thank you so much for joining me again. I'm George the Antique Nomad. We'll see you for our regular broadcasts Mondays and Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, and bye-bye for now. Thanks for joining me again in the fun and fascinating antique community here where online meets the real world. Please click the subscribe button below, click the bell to be notified when new videos upload, leave a comment below, and hit thumbs up to like this video. Links to our online social media daily posts and our items for sale are in the description. This is George at the Antique Nomad. Bye for now.